what did everyone say? All the fintechs were going to disrupt all the banks. And I think in elements, there's definitely been parts of that where that's happened. Leveraging that technology has kept banks a bit honest as well. I'll be upfront. There's been times where we've gone on a journey with the client and whether it might be too early in their growth story or we just don't have the right products and solutions or really have the right overlap from a market perspective. So it's important to have that conversation up front. And I think the team at Finmo, as I said, a really great matchup in terms of that roadmap. Any ways we can work with firms like StraightsX, and not even just StraightsX alone, is how can we work with them, their partners, whether they be platforms, other players in the ecosystem. That's really what we're trying to do in bridging that gap, whether it be only in the fintech or digital asset or native crypto world, to even furthermore into the sort of more traditional TradFi or other players as well.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's internet and digital economy, or as we like to call it, ASEAN innovation and beyond. I'm your host, Paolo Quino, and we're back with season 8 of our podcast. It's always great to meet people from different players in the ecosystem, not just startups, leaders who are all invested in technology and innovating financial services in the region. And I have one such leader with us on call, none other than Luke Boland, who's the head of FinTech Asia at Standard Chartered Bank. I think, Luke, thank you so much for coming on call with us. I come across you because you had done these conversations with some of our portfolio companies at Insignia, Finmo, and StraightsX. And there have been some announcements over the past year about a lot more collaboration between Standard Chartered and fintechs. And so I was interested to hear from you directly, like how you view these various technologies that are up and coming, how they're shaping the banking industry, and how fintech founders especially can better work with banks and institutions like SC. Yeah, before getting into the meat of the discussion, would love to learn a little bit more about you as well and how you got into this space. I know prior to Standard Chartered, you've always been like a banker, right, in Australia and all of that. Were you always exposed to fintechs, or how would you describe your relationship with fintech? You can start with that.
Yeah, for sure. And look, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to do this, and I've enjoyed some of the other coverage that you've done. I started working at Standard Chartered about 6 years ago now. And look, it was really to come and join the bank, focus a lot on building out the fintech client coverage team, the business firstly, mostly in Singapore, which was growing already, in Southeast Asia and across the whole Standard Chart network. It was a bit of an interesting experience. As I said, if people have done the math, and I joined 6 years ago, yes, it was around that time of where we were all sent to work from home. And literally that's what it was. I joined on the Monday and I was home by the Thursday and came back 9 months later into the bank.
That's quite the initiation.
Yeah. So it was, I was, as soon as we were allowed back in the office, I was probably one of the first that were banging on the doors to come in. But yeah, I think I fortunately at that time, I'd already been in Singapore for a while. I had working at an Australian bank in Singapore in a slightly different role, more in like liquidity and deposits. But I had also covered some of the fintech names that had had regional headquarters in Singapore, but the bank was doing stuff within Australia as well. So that point in which I joined Standard Chartered, I'd been fairly exposed to the fintech ecosystem. I knew a lot of the clients. I knew a lot of the people that were at the clients. The bank had already had relationship. So I think I knew the clients better than I knew the bank, which was a good thing to happen. When I first joined, we didn't have Zoom or BlueG or anything like that, or Teams. So we had a lot of, still back in the sort of almost teleconference days for the first few months. But look, I think, the experience starts even before that, when I was from Melbourne originally. And as I said, the business that I helped start, it was in the merchant acquiring space. And so really deeply started to understood that sector around card acceptance and so forth. And that's how I joined a bank, was in a role that was related to that, managing a lot of the large merchant relationships. Showing my age here, but did a lot of work when contactless started to get rolled out. And that's where it began, and understanding some of the players in the global industry. So as some of the big merchant acquiring online names that we're all familiar with, the large merchants like Expedia and so forth, started to enter the Australian market, was involved in that. So again, showing my grey hairs, but it's a journey that, from a sort of roundabout way that led me to Standard Chartered, but having a lot of different knowledge and experience positioned me well to work with the fintech clients that we support today.
Yeah, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that experience that you covered and what you've seen in terms of how fintechs and banks have that kind of relationship over the years that you've been in the industry from Australia all the way to Singapore. How would you describe that relationship? Obviously, it's been quite interesting seeing how I guess maybe 10 years ago fintechs were seen as very much outsiders and like what are they doing kind of approach. But now there's a lot, the lines have blurred, so to speak, and banks will have their own kind of fintech arms, and you have all these kinds of different approaches to technology and innovation. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. Look, what did everyone say? All the fintechs were going to disrupt all the banks. And I think in elements, there's definitely been parts of that where that's happened. And definitely there's been that innovation that fintechs have brought to the financial services, leveraging that technology has kept banks a bit honest as well. So there's not in all parts of banking, but certainly areas that have been disrupted. And whether it be from a better customer or UX experience to pricing to different ways, it's been a relationship that I think now has lifted the bar for the delivery of financial services. Look, I think, firstly, I think the understanding of the fintech clients today and their business models and requirements, banks are much stronger at it, right? Whether it's over time having these directly as clients, you have people that have worked in banking moving into the fintech space. I think even today here in Singapore, I think there's at least 4 to 5 roles available at different banks advertising, looking for people to cover fintechs. So I think that has changed dramatically. Whereas I think previously it was a bit hit and miss for perhaps a fintech client approaching a bank. They might find someone that's interested, and then that person tries to champion it internally and may not always have many supporters. I think that's dramatically changed, right? I think all parts of the bank have some sort of strategy or view around what is the fintech segment. And it may be from a banking relationship standpoint, it may be from a partnership standpoint, but both in terms of how originating new client relationships in the partnership that the bank here has had with Atomi is one great example of that. So there are different fundamentals, but I think it is a lot different landscape than it was even when I started my career in banking.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that point you mentioned of originating client relationships and trying to bridge that gap of understanding. How has that changed in your role over the last 6 years since you joined the Standard Chartered? Is it a lot easier now, or are there new challenges, so to speak, when it comes to that?
Yeah, look, I would say I've been extremely lucky in terms of that experience. Firstly, obviously, in the last 6 years, the work that I've been able to do in multiple markets, whether it be here in Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, and working with fintechs from those markets, working with global fintechs looking to enter those markets, getting understand the regulatory environment, that it has become easier, partly because of that regulatory environment. There are markets today, yes, where there isn't a clear sort of regulatory framework or so forth for fintechs in that location, but that's becoming more of the exception than the rule. So that perhaps is the easy part. It's one thing interesting at the moment, yeah, where it can be particularly around, I guess, the digital asset space, the conversations around stable coins and the use of that technology that has certainly taken it to the next level. So I think sometimes I have to remind myself that when was looking around 5 years ago looking for support, and there might not have been as many people there to give it. Now that has changed, and then that's I think a benefit for banks, it's a benefit for fintechs, it's a benefit for businesses, right? That there is that view to look at, okay, how can we enhance what we're doing, and whether it's adopting a new process or technology or the use of stable, that's great. But that has been one of the changes. There's definitely more structure around things, and regulatory structure is part of that.
And since you brought it up, the whole discussion of stablecoin, I'll get right to it. And obviously, one of our portfolio companies, StraightSex, has that relationship with you, with the Standard Chartered. We'd love to learn a little bit more of what you said about stablecoins and that technology bringing things to the next level. What does that mean in the context of Standard Chartered? And obviously, I guess StraightSex has done, I would say, the pretty difficult work of working with regulators and actually helping mature the kind of Singapore kind of regulatory ecosystem around this technology. And although there's still more work to be done, but I think they've definitely done a lot in that regard. How did that aspect also help build kind of trust in the relationship as well?
Yeah, of course. Look, I think what StraightSex have done with the work in the Singapore market, even before they were StraightSex and issuing a stable coin and their other related payments businesses across Singapore and Indonesia. Look, I think take a step back. If you look at us as a bank, one thing that I always looked at is while we may not be a dedicated local bank in every market, we typically have a significant presence in many. And one of the commitments I always wanted to do with our business, or what we're trying to do, is ensuring that we do support the local fintech ecosystem as well. And I think StraightX is a great example of that. And as you said, whether that be the influence or the input or the work that they have done from a Singapore perspective to foster that ecosystem here. Again, back from a payment standpoint for regular fintech, or as traditional fintech, as I like to call it, to the work around working with MAS, working with other partners around stablecoins as well. I think that is something that should definitely be called out, and the team there have done a great job. So it was always a view that we want to be a part of that ecosystem and balance that between working, yes, with global players as we do, but also ensuring that we definitely support the local, domestic or homegrown or businesses that are also working in that space as well. Look, I'll be very upfront. What I say is what we do is we do boring things for interesting people. Let us be clear, StraightX are the interesting people here, and they are doing really interesting stuff. And it's great, some of the stuff that they've done, which we'll get into. But obviously, what do we work with them on? We support them around holding the balances for the stablecoin, supporting them for the clients to on and off ramp, for that mint and burn activity, and doing that in a way that we understand what's required from a regulatory standpoint, ensuring from a customer standpoint that there is that trust and that resilience as well for our banking infrastructure to support all the work that they've put into their stablecoin infrastructure. So we do what we can to support how can we make, I guess, the fiat or payment rails of that aspect move as fast as a stable coin. And that is the element of that partnership, is that level of reliance on each other that happens. I think what is great about what StraightX is focused on, right, because it's somewhat unique in some aspects where you and I may have been exposed to the use of their stablecoin, but wouldn't have a clue. Right, so that back end infrastructure around the power of a stable coin to support instant settlement or faster cross-border payments between two entities or between a merchant and a buyer who might not even know that was used. And I think that's one of the great examples of around no one in the morning wakes up and says they want to use a XSGD stablecoin. They may very well do if they've got a particular need to solve. But if I was a traveler with the ability to scan a QR of a merchant in Singapore from another country and be able to pay that merchant, so pay locally and that merchant wants to receive funds locally, and if a stable coin helps that settlement flow, then that's fantastic. And so look, any ways we can work with firms like StraightX, and not even just StraightX alone, is how can we work with them, their partners, whether they be platforms, other players in the ecosystem. That's really what we're trying to do in bridging that gap, whether it be only in the fintech or digital asset or native crypto world, to even furthermore into the sort of more traditional TradFi or other players as well.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of a quote from something somebody said back in 2022. The whole goal is to become invisible. And I think that you really kind of spoke to that. And yeah, I think nobody really cares about what technology it is as long as it delivers on the experience and the efficiency. And to your point about doing the quote unquote boring work for interesting people, I think that also speaks to the structure that the fintech ecosystem is, I would say, embracing a lot more than previous years. And it's quite great to see a lot more of these players partner with institutions with the kind of distribution that, for example, like Standard Chartered has. I was curious to know, since obviously XSGD very much a Singapore champion, and I think one of the things Chenwei has always wanted to do is, we want to create these kind of stablecoin rails for different currencies, for different markets, right? Not just the US technology, so to speak. What are your views on how the stablecoin technology or blockchain adoption has shifted in Asia overall?
Yeah, for sure. Let me also add, one day I hope that we will do interesting things with interesting people, as well as we might do interesting things for boring people as well. Look, I think as a bank, we definitely view that digital assets is an essential part of going to be the financial infrastructure, right? So they're going forward that most settlements and payments will occur on the blockchain. Look, essentially, or blockchain technology as such, right? So essentially, look, if you look at stable coins as yourself in terms of the tokenization of fiat money, it is definitely something that even perhaps as a bank at first, the adoption outside of, I guess, the crypto trading world, where it was there to solve 24/7, but also there as a mechanism of payment when perhaps many of those type of firms was blocked out of the regular banking ecosystem, which is changing today. There are crypto businesses today that perhaps, wouldn't have been able to get access to banking services, but as that industry has evolved, are starting to get that in place, right? But in terms of, therefore, then that adoption of stablecoin for a mechanism of settlement and payment, and then even starting to think around use for collateral or in the more capital market side of thing, that speed of adoption, it has been, I think, even more than we as a bank have had projected. Now, I think fortunately, even though we may not have projected it, the velocity in which it's happened, we've been fairly entrenched in moving in that direction. We are obviously in the application in Hong Kong to launch a Hong Kong dollar stablecoin. We work, as you said, with firms like StraightX, and we're really seeing other markets like the Philippines develop a sandbox around stablecoin. And if you look at Philippines as a market, historically a real remittance reliant location, has really moved to that adoption as well. Even before Zodia Markets, which is a ventures business that we have, we've learned a great deal from the work that they've done around stablecoin settlement. And they have both dollar and non-dollar stablecoins. And really that is one of the ways that the bank has learned, right? Because it's very hard to just sit back and watch everything happen. It's much better to be involved, right? And be part of the ecosystem. And I think we are going to see even more proliferation of stablecoin issuance, the use cases of stablecoin, and we'll play up our role in whether that's supplying traditional banking services under the regulations of what's required for firms or our clients to get access to a stablecoin, to further things that we're doing around the launch of our digital asset custody, which today does allow for the custody within the bank of some stable coins, and that's just going to be further developed. But I think it comes back to is that we have had conversations when a client comes to us and goes, I want to do something with stable coins. You want to understand, okay, what is it? Is there a problem you're trying to solve, to really understand what is the use case? But we are definitely seeing a lot of use cases where that adoption or the use of a stable coin does really drive a better outcome.
I think what you mentioned about really not just staying on the sidelines, but really being an active player in the ecosystem where a lot of the development is happening is really a theme for Standard Chartered. And I think definitely a lot of banks invested in innovation technology. I also wanted to talk about another portfolio company that announced like the work that they're doing with you guys, which is Finmo, a treasury management platform with a lot of money movement capabilities across various countries. And a lot of I would say, I had the podcast recently with their CPO, Akhil, and he was really talking about, he said like something around 80% of his time is actually it's not as much thinking about the product as it is about distribution and how do you integrate the product into various local kind of infrastructure, whether that's other fintech players or other banks, whoever's a go-to for businesses in that particular market. And I think you also mentioned earlier that Standard Chartered itself has a lot of these have local presences across many different markets. So how would you speak to SC's approach to working with clients that are looking to leverage the kind of distribution that SC has, and what are you looking for in terms of those partnerships?
Yeah, no, look, and I think you're right. Finmo is a great example of where that works and where it can work well. And we're certainly starting off on that sort of longer term journey with them. Look, obviously, we do get a lot of approaches from fintech clients, from new businesses, even some more established in the space, perhaps looking at Standard Chartered as a banking partner. And look, I'll be upfront, we can't work with everyone, and there are many different facets for that. But what we obviously do have a lot of conversations, and obviously if we looked at Finmo as a great example, right? It's understanding the business model and maybe why does their business differ from others in the market, and then understanding their roadmap, their requirements, and their plans. And obviously if we look at Finmo in particular, right? So as you said, a really interesting business model in terms of almost as combining that treasury management system requirement to payments, where a customer can use all of that or parts of that, integrating with us beyond just payments, but giving their clients the visibility of their balances of their accounts. And then that roadmap part, right? So just ensuring that where they're going to operate, where they're looking to operate, where they're looking to get regulated, fits our network. And so obviously with the plans around Singapore, obviously the UK, Hong Kong, the UAE, and we're in some of the markets already operating in Australia. That fits where we have capability, where we have people that understand the business, understand how to work with these clients, and we can deliver the right thing from having the same APIs, from having the same FX capability. That's really important, right? Because look, I'll be upfront. There's been times where we've gone on a journey with the client, and whether it might be too early in their growth story, or we just don't have the right products and solutions, or really have the right overlap from a market perspective, and it's never a good outcome for everyone, right? So it's important to have that conversation up front, and I think that the team at Finmo, as I said, a really great matchup in terms of that roadmap, the products that we can do and deliver for them and their customers, but also that next stuff that they do around the sort of open banking, which we've been keen to explore with them. And it's a journey, right? Because elements of that might need more development on our side. We might be able to deliver something to them that they hadn't thought of. And because of our product capability, allows them to offer a new service or solution to a new client. Or that we're in most of the Middle East, we're in the UK, we're in the US, we're in pretty much all of Southeast Asia. So even that may skew their roadmap plan. So as a bank, it's always important to work together, and having those different factors around having the right products, right connectivity, and right sort of overlap of markets, it is important.
Yeah, I really like that point, what you mentioned of how the priorities as well of Standard Chartered, for example, could potentially affect the roadmap of the fintech, and how the fintech also has to take that into account. And when really thinking about how the scope of the relationship, so to speak, I wanted to touch on what you mentioned about open banking and kind of your views on that in particular. I think that complexity of how kind of data is managed and the different regulations around data usage and all of that across different markets impacts the role of AI in banking as well, because I think that's often you can always say like, oh, we use AI, so, but there's always that kind of discussion of where does data come from, how is it used, how is it secured, and all of that, and how do you think of that relationship, especially when working with clients that also pitch to you guys of, oh, we want to do something with inventing AI for banking or those kinds of use cases.
Yeah, look, obviously it is a topic that is being talked about a great deal, almost more than perhaps stable coins at the moment as well. And there's actually probably an interrelationship between the two, right? But look, obviously, again, it's like you can mention AI, you can mention AI in banking, but it means different things, right? And yes, no doubt today, many of our customers have probably moved faster in the adoption of leveraging AI, whether that be creating faster onboarding, whether that be through transaction monitoring and being able to shift through data and so forth, using that, whether it be just general purpose use cases within the firm to make it faster for emailing and recording of information. No doubt that is something that, we're a bank, there's a harder time in elements of developing or adopting that technology because, as you said, a bank has a huge amount of data, right? But that data shouldn't be necessarily access to all, and that data needs to be kept safe. And when you develop these programs, it requires a huge lot of rethinking around that, the access of data, or what it can be used for, training, and how it can affect the job scope. And as you said, as a bank that is so many different locations and following different regulatory requirements, and whether the data is required onshore or offshore, what can be accessed by who, there is a myriad of things that, although I might sit here and say, look, I want to make my calls faster and my emails faster, there are other impacts. Hopefully AI delivers more than that. But look, I definitely think that today we get vendor questionnaires, and it is a question that gets asked: how is the bank adopting that technology? How would the interaction between our clients and the bank's adoption of that technology comes into play? So look, it is something that it will be ever developing, and a bank plays a particular role in that as well.
Just to wrap up the series of questions we've just covered, all the way from stablecoins to AI, and banks are in the business of managing risk. So I was curious to know, like, what are your views on the biggest top of mind risks when it comes to working with the clients to implement certain technologies or certain use cases of these emerging technologies? What are top of mind considerations?
As a bank, we've been going over an update of our own legacy systems and the impact that can have on clients when you're going through a huge technology change as well. I think that's definitely one thing that keeps me up at night in terms of, could a changeover cause an impact to an end user or an end client? And that's the thing, our clients rely on our infrastructure and our systems to be robust to deliver their services. So I think that's a definite thing that we focus on, and the impact that can have. I think obviously the other around cybersecurity and the risks related to that, the potential around fraud and scams and the use of AI around impersonation. That's another one that we've been really interested in looking at and ensuring that both that is monitored and there are almost elements of friction to try and reduce those things from happening in some aspects.
I think that's what a lot of startups and fintechs also come to and have conversations with. That's the reason why they have these conversations with Standard Chartered, is because you guys do provide that kind of infrastructure, and whether that's through distribution or whether that's through just the way things have operated and processes and all of that, that they themselves could improve their product experience by virtue of working with you guys. I wanted to also talk about the founders, right? Because obviously you did mention that a large part of your role is cultivating these relationships for Standard Chartered. And obviously that happens as well on a person-to-person kind of level. And you also mentioned that you were more immersed or more exposed to the fintech ecosystem than you were with the kind of like banking side of things when you first joined SC. So I found that quite interesting. I'm curious to know, what have you learned from working with a lot of these founders, with folks like Tinwei or David? Like what do you think makes a successful fintech founder from the point of being able to build like a really global kind of business?
Look, I think what we've seen, fintechs typically establish a solution or service to plug a gap or where they've seen an opportunity within the market that they've come from, right? And that's different by market. In some places, it may be more about lending. In some places, it's more about payments. And in some places, it skipped that and moved more into the digital asset space as well. So that's obviously typically what we see. A founder or has seen that opportunity, has a particular skill set or partners with other co-founders to bring that to life. I think one thing I would to say is I'd like to consider a lot of these friends as well. And that I think is a very close relationship, as I said, from what the fintech may rely on the bank. It is really important to have a really open and strong relationship with the firm, and have access to the founders. In some cases, to really be that champion for that business within the bank. So it's one advice looking at a firm or a founder looking to go out and speaking to banks, giving insight to what the business model is, what they do, is really having that really clearly laid out, which is perhaps different to what you would lay out, say, if you're looking for funding. It's what's different to what you'd have laid out if you're looking to acquire or originate customer relationships. It's having it really clearly laid out to the audience. It could be, yes, someone like me that is a bit experienced into the segment and may be able to recognize what the business model is, but it may be someone within a bank that doesn't have the same experience. And it's just really honing in of what it is that the business model is doing, what is the organizational structure, what are the different roles, what are the different teams, and really laying that out. So essentially that person that the founder may be presenting that to within the bank can become that champion of that fintech internally. And that's something we've seen. Yeah, I've seen different levels of that occurring. And look, I think we've gone on a bit of a journey, right? There's probably a period where founders, fintechs felt that in order to grow, they needed to have multiple business lines or for multiple products across multiple client segments. I think that's changed a little bit and founders more about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this really well, I'm going to execute, and then I will build out from there. And I think that's a bit of a change. And that is a helpful change, because then owning that space around delivering a particular solution or solving a particular problem, that is really important. And then you can build and then you can acquire more customers once you gain that level of market control or market understanding. So I think that is something we've seen change. And look, yeah, we go through periods where some of our clients I'll get a call on a regular basis. Oh, I need to open an account for a new entity. And like, what is it doing? And how is it related to your existing business? So it's just always having that sort of messaging clear. And it's only in a way to empower, whether that be a relationship manager or a product partner in a bank, to be sure that they can represent that correctly. As I said, I'd like to hope that I'm not the only one that would count many of these fintech founders that we work with and firms as close friends. But that is what I love about this space as well, that there's some great people building, doing great things. And I think everyone moves along that journey.
On the other hand, I also wanted to wrap up our conversation by asking you, what keeps you excited about your role? You've been at the Standard Chartered for 6 years now, and there's a lot happening in the fintech space. Last year was quite literally named Year of the Stablecoin. I don't know what this year, the year of, but yeah, what keeps you excited about your work and the kind of relationships you're building with founders?
Look, no day is ever the same. Here I am today doing a podcast. I can tell you I wasn't doing speaking to someone like you yesterday. In essence, yeah, there are always new things that we are doing, meeting or understanding. Just when you think you may know the ecosystem, there's someone will say to you, "Look, have you heard about this firm?" and what they're doing. And there's a whole new journey that you can go on. What I'm really excited about this year, as I said, at Standard Chartered, there is definitely a focus in leaning into the ecosystem, whether that be across the board around, digital assets, stable coins as well. We as much focus as continuing what we've been building around just delivery of cross-border payments, supporting our clients, entering into new markets. I think we're only just getting started. Look, a predominant of our business has been in Singapore, it has been in Hong Kong, it's been growing in Southeast Asia, and we've been opening new markets there. It is now really growing in the UAE. We're doing more in India. And yes, we're a large bank that has a large network and franchise in Africa as well. And we're starting to look at what we can do there. Yes, the adoption around stablecoins is an influence to that. I think it's a timing factor of where we're expanding out, growing from a hub into the markets and locations around. Yes, it's been 6 years. Do I feel like I've accomplished everything we can? Absolutely not. Has there been some misses along the way? Maybe. Have we had some great successes? Yeah. Do we want to have more? Absolutely. And that's what I'm excited about, is continually evolving of where we're going to be doing things, who we are going to be doing things with, how can we partner, right? So if, again, the bank's doing some great things in investment through our SC Ventures, a big part, if the bank is empowered to invest or build, we have to be prepared to bank it as well. As the bank develops new products, we will be doing interesting things for interesting people. We've got a lot to do, and I'm just looking forward to continue doing that with the people within the bank who, definitely a renewed interest and real support across our management from our CEO down, and to the ecosystem and clients that we work with.
Yeah, he's doing more interesting things for interesting people. And I'm sure, there's that sometimes people say you can take the person out of the startup, but you can't take the startup out of the person. And I think that's definitely speaks to your experience, even though you've spent most of your recent career working in banking. I think that kind of mindset you have of always looking out for what's next is definitely entrepreneurial. And I think for any fintech founders listening in, if you want to make a friend at Standard Chartered, Luke's your guy.
I'm more valuable here than I am elsewhere, for absolutely. So please. We have a growing team as well, which is fantastic. And look, it's great that we're having conversations and able to do more within the space.
Awesome. And yeah, here's to reading more news and sharing more news about more work that you're doing with fintechs and hopefully more of our portfolio as well. On that note, thank you so much, Luke, for joining me on call. I think this was a really great conversation to have. We've had a lot of conversations with fintech founders, but it's also great to hear from the stakeholders that they work with, especially the banks, and how they're viewing these different technologies, how they view working with fintechs as well, and how founders can develop those relationships better with the banks. So thank you for joining me on call.
Awesome. Great to have you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Luke.